The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the quiet streets. Most people were settling in for the evening, preparing dinner, watching television, or catching up with family after a long day. The neighborhood had always seemed calm, a place where everyone knew each other and life moved at its own unhurried pace. But on this particular evening, something was about to disrupt that sense of safety, something that no one could have predicted. She was driving home from work, the familiar hum of the car engine a comforting rhythm after a long day. Her mind was replaying the events of the day, meetings, deadlines, small victories, and minor frustrations. She was tired, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing she had handled everything with focus and determination. The streets were nearly empty, and the evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. It should have been an ordinary drive, a peaceful end to an ordinary day. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Just a few blocks from home, she noticed a police car parked on the side of the road. At first, she didn't think much of it. Police presence in the neighborhood wasn't unusual, but then the car's lights flashed suddenly, and the siren let out a short, sharp sound that made her heart skip a beat. The signal was clear. She was being pulled over. She carefully guided her car to the side of the road, the orange glow of the streetlights casting shadows across her dashboard. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel, her mind alert and aware, though she tried to keep her breathing calm. Pulling over in these situations was never easy, even for those who had done nothing wrong. There was always a flicker of fear, a moment of tension because you never quite knew what could happen next. As the police car approached, she could see the officers inside. They looked like they had already made up their minds, their expressions hard, serious, and unwelcoming. She could feel their eyes on her, judging, assuming, sizing her up. She had faced many challenges in her life, but moments like this were unnerving. Even with her background and training, she understood the weight of the situation. She knew that any sudden move could be misinterpreted. Any hesitation could be seen as defiance. The car stopped behind her, and the officers stepped out. One of them started walking toward her with a noticeable stiffness in his stride, while the other stayed closer to the car, hand hovering near his utility belt. They spoke to her through the open window, their voices firm, commanding and tinged with impatience. They asked her for her license and registration, but there was something in the way they spoke that felt more like a confrontation than a simple routine check. She handed over her documents without a word, her eyes calm, her posture steady. She knew that showing fear or aggression would only make the situation worse. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, but she reminded herself to stay composed. Her life experience had taught her that remaining calm and collected in tense moments was often the difference between danger and safety. The officer who had approached her leaned slightly into the car, his eyes scanning her face with a hint of disbelief, as if he couldn't reconcile the person he was looking at with some preconceived notion in his mind. He asked her where she was coming from, his tone laced with suspicion. She answered politely, explaining that she was returning home from work. Her voice was steady even, and confident, betraying none of the nervousness she felt inside. But the officer wasn't satisfied. He began to make comments, casual at first, but with an unmistakable edge of prejudice. The words were subtle yet sharp, designed to unsettle, to make her feel out of place, to remind her that she was being judged not for her actions, but for something beyond her control. It was a familiar feeling, one she had encountered before in different forms, but it never got easier. Despite the rising tension, she stayed calm. She had trained herself to think clearly under pressure, to read situations and react with precision. Her mind ran through possible scenarios, weighing each one carefully. She understood that any wrong move could escalate the situation, but she also knew that she could protect herself if necessary. Her training wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and strategic. She knew how to assess threats, how to remain invisible in a situation until action was required. The officer, seemingly frustrated by her calm demeanor, tried to assert more control. He leaned closer, gesturing with his hands, speaking in a sharper tone. But she didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She simply listened, responded politely when necessary, and maintained an air of quiet authority. There was a power in her stillness, a silent strength that made it clear she was not an easy target. Meanwhile, the other officer stayed by the car, eyes darting back and forth, scanning the surroundings. He occasionally whispered into his radio, a nervous edge to his movements. It was clear that the officers were used to being in control, used to situations where their authority was not questioned. But they had underestimated the woman before them. They had assumed she would comply without resistance, that she would fit into the role they had prepared for her. As the interaction continued, a few neighbors began to notice the scene. From their windows, they saw the police talking to her, the tense exchange, the way she stood calm and unwavering. Some felt a pang of worry, sensing that something might go wrong, while others were silently impressed by her composure. There was a sense that this was more than a routine traffic stop, that the outcome could swing either way depending on how the next few moments unfolded. Inside her mind, she was already preparing for what might happen next. She considered the layout of the area, the distance between the officers, the position of her car, and the potential for intervention if things escalated. She knew she had options, and she knew that her training gave her an advantage that most people did not have. But she also knew that patience and observation were just as important as action. The moment had not yet come to strike. It was a time to read, to wait, and to understand. Time seemed to stretch as the officers continued their questioning. Each second was filled with an unspoken tension, a silent negotiation of power. She answered each question truthfully but without giving away more than necessary. Her calmness seemed to confuse the officers, who had expected hesitation, fear, or defensiveness. Instead, they were met with someone who was alert, composed, and fully aware of her surroundings. The situation was a delicate balance, a test of wills without words. She understood the risks, yet she did not allow them to dictate her behavior. Her confidence was not arrogance. It was grounded in experience, in knowledge, and in a sense of self that could not be shaken by intimidation or prejudice. Every movement, every glance, every breath was intentional, controlled, and deliberate. Finally, the officer leaned back slightly, seemingly unsure how to proceed. The tension in the air was palpable, a mix of frustration, surprise, and a subtle recognition that this interaction was not going as expected. For the first time, there was a hesitation, a crack in the armor of authority that they had relied upon. They were confronted not just with a person, but with skill, confidence, and awareness that challenged their assumptions. As she sat in her car, the sun setting behind her, she remained vigilant. She knew the encounter was far from over, that the officers could still make choices that might escalate the situation, but she also knew that she had control over herself, her actions, and her response. In that quiet, tense moment, she embodied a quiet strength that would guide her through whatever came next, a strength built on experience, preparation, and an unshakable sense of self. It was a simple drive home that had turned into something far more intense, far more revealing. It was a reminder that even in ordinary moments, the unexpected can happen, and in those moments it is not fear, but preparation, calm, and confidence that can make all the difference. She was ready for whatever was coming, though neither she nor the officers could yet imagine the events that would soon unfold. The air felt heavier now, as if the night itself had grown tense, holding its breath. The flashing lights from the police car painted the quiet street in alternating shades of red and blue, making the shadows dance across the walls of the nearby houses. The evening that had begun so peacefully had transformed into a charged moment, one filled with uncertainty. She remained calm, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, but every sense in her body was alert. She could feel the shift in energy, the subtle way the officers moved, the way their eyes lingered on her, calculating and judging. The first officer, the one who had approached her earlier, took a deliberate step closer. His posture was rigid, his face a mask of impatience. He leaned slightly into the car, the tone of his voice sharp and commanding. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. There was no hint of suggestion in the words, only a demand. The command was casual to him, a routine part of his job, but to her it was a test of composure, a moment to measure the intentions of the people before her. She didn't move immediately. Instead, she met his gaze steadily, her eyes calm, unflinching. She knew that sudden movements could be misinterpreted. Every action, every gesture mattered. Slowly, she reached for the seatbelt and unclipped it with deliberate care. She opened the door, stepping out in a controlled, confident way. Her posture was upright, strong, yet non-threatening. Every step was measured, every movement intentional, designed to show respect for the situation while maintaining her own boundaries. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly. He had expected hesitation, maybe even nervousness. Instead, he was met with someone fully aware of themselves, someone who refused to be intimidated. He waved his hand in a motion that was meant to guide her toward the front of the car, but she hesitated, not out of defiance, but to assess the situation further. She scanned the area with quick, practiced glances, the position of the officers, the distance between them, the possible exits, even the layout of the surrounding neighborhood. Every detail mattered. "Come on," the officer said, his voice edged with irritation. "Right here." He pointed to a spot in front of the car. She nodded slightly, signaling compliance, but she didn't move until she felt fully ready. She kept her hands visible at all times, showing that she had nothing hidden, but she was aware that visibility alone was not enough. The way she stood, the way she held herself conveyed control. The second officer, who had remained near the car, shifted slightly. He was more cautious now, his earlier casual confidence replaced by a subtle tension. He whispered into his radio, his voice low, perhaps hoping for guidance or backup, but there was an unease in his movements, a hesitation that suggested he was beginning to realize this stop was not ordinary. The woman in front of them was composed, observant, and ready. As she approached the front of the car, the first officer took a step back, giving her just enough space to avoid appearing aggressive. "Hands where I can see them," he instructed. She raised her hands slowly, palms open, keeping them at chest level. Her eyes never left his, but she also subtly scanned his stance, noting the way he positioned himself, the way he held his hands, and the slight tension in his shoulders. She could tell he was trying to maintain authority, but he had underestimated her awareness and control. "You know why we stopped you?" the officer asked, his tone now tinged with frustration. He had begun with small talk, routine questions, but those had failed to unsettle her. He was now trying a different tactic, hoping that direct confrontation would provoke a reaction. She shook her head slightly, keeping her expression neutral, waiting for him to explain. "You were speeding," he said, pointing to the speedometer reading he claimed to have recorded. "And we've had reports of suspicious activity in this area." His words were designed to put her on the defensive, to make her feel guilty or nervous. But she remained calm. "I wasn't aware of my speed," she replied simply, her voice even, polite, and composed. "I've been driving home from work. That's all." The officer's eyes flicked to her hands, then back to her face. There was a moment of silence, a tense pause in the cool night air. He seemed frustrated that she did not respond with fear or hesitation. She realized that her calmness was unsettling to him. Most people would fumble, stumble, or raise their voices. Most people would reveal nervousness or discomfort. But she showed none of that. She projected confidence without arrogance, control without aggression. He took another step closer, his presence looming, his tone growing sharper. "Step back," he said, pointing toward the side of the road. His command was firm, but she didn't flinch. She took a slow, measured step back, ensuring her hands remained visible, her posture strong and upright. She was compliant, but she was not submissive. Every movement conveyed awareness, readiness, and self-respect. The second officer, still near the car, began checking her documents again. His eyes darted to her repeatedly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. He whispered something into the radio, likely reporting the situation, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely sure what to say. There was an awkwardness now between the two officers, a subtle tension caused by their lack of preparation for someone who could hold their ground so firmly. The first officer, clearly irritated, leaned slightly forward. His voice carried a mix of authority and impatience. "Do you have any weapons on you?" he asked. It was a standard question for a stop, but the way he asked it felt more like an accusation than a precaution. She shook her head, replying clearly and calmly, "No, I don't." Her tone was steady, honest, and controlled. She understood the importance of clarity in these moments, and the need to communicate effectively to avoid unnecessary escalation. There was a brief pause. The officers exchanged a glance, a subtle recognition that this was not a typical encounter. Their movements were less confident now, their usual authority challenged by someone who would not be intimidated. She could sense the shift, and while she remained calm, her awareness sharpened. Every possibility played in her mind, from de-escalation to defending herself if the situation went further than it should. The officer who had approached her earlier took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "Step aside from the car," he commanded. She moved as requested, but each step was deliberate, controlled. She maintained eye contact, hands visible, body relaxed but ready. She knew that showing fear would make them bolder. Showing aggression would escalate the situation unnecessarily. Her goal was to remain composed while being fully prepared for whatever might happen next. Her mind worked quickly, calculating the positions, the risks, the potential outcomes. She thought about her training, her experience, the countless hours spent preparing for high-stress situations. But she also thought about the human aspect, the unpredictability of people, the danger of assumptions, and the way bias could cloud judgment. She understood that these officers were acting not only on procedure, but on preconceived notions, and she had to navigate that reality carefully. The first officer took another step closer, his impatience visible now. His voice carried a sharper edge. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" he asked. Her eyes met his, steady and calm, and she nodded slightly. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, but her presence alone made it clear she was fully aware and prepared. She was listening, observing, and ready to act if needed, but she was not giving him any reason to escalate further. The second officer, still by the car, began glancing around the area, his unease growing. He checked his surroundings, the distance between them and any potential witnesses, and even the position of his partner. There was a subtle fear in his movements, a recognition that the person in front of them was not someone to be underestimated. It was a shift in power, almost imperceptible but real, that changed the dynamic entirely. As the minutes passed, the tension in the air became almost tangible. Neighbors, now noticing the extended interaction, began to peek through their windows, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. The woman remained composed, her body language calm yet alert, her eyes scanning for any sign of escalation. She understood that this was more than a simple traffic stop. It was a test of character, awareness, and control. Then came the moment that would define the encounter. The first officer, frustrated and perhaps feeling the need to assert dominance, reached out toward her arm. It was a sudden, aggressive move meant to provoke, to intimidate, to force compliance. In that instant, her training kicked in. Years of preparation and experience sharpened her reflexes. She didn't panic. She didn't shout. She simply reacted with precision, moving her arm to deflect and create space, her body poised, her movements deliberate and controlled. The officer froze, surprised by the sudden and unexpected reaction. He had assumed compliance, expected fear, and now faced someone capable, confident, and unflinching. The second officer, witnessing the interaction, took a cautious step back, uncertainty flashing in his eyes. The balance of power had shifted, and the realization was immediate and undeniable. They had underestimated her. The quiet street, once peaceful, now felt charged with anticipation. Every breath, every movement mattered. She maintained her composure, aware of her surroundings, aware of the reactions of the officers, and fully prepared for what might come next. The encounter had escalated, but she had not lost control. She had not let fear dictate her actions, and in that calm readiness, she held the upper hand in a way that the officers could not yet comprehend. The moment stretched like a taut rope, every second heavy with tension. She stood still, her breathing steady, her body balanced and ready. The officers froze, caught between surprise and the need to assert control. They had approached this situation expecting compliance, expecting someone who would follow instructions without question. But now their assumptions were crumbling, and they didn't know how to respond. Her eyes scanned them, noticing every subtle movement, the tightening of their hands on their belts, the small shift in their stance, the way their eyes darted between her and each other. It was clear that they were realizing, perhaps for the first time, that they had underestimated her. That realization gave her a quiet confidence. She didn't move too quickly, didn't make any sudden gestures, but her mind was working fast, calculating, analyzing, ready to act if the situation escalated. The first officer, attempting to regain control, spoke again. His voice was sharper now, tinged with frustration and a hint of nervousness. "Step back," he ordered, gesturing for her to move aside. She complied, but every movement was deliberate, measured, and purposeful. She kept her hands visible at all times, showing that she was not hiding anything, yet making it clear that she was aware, alert, and capable of defending herself. The second officer, still near the car, whispered something into his radio, his tone low and cautious. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the subtle hesitations in his movements. He seemed unsure how to proceed, and that uncertainty was almost palpable. The two officers exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication that spoke volumes. They had expected an easy encounter, and now they were facing someone who would not be intimidated. Suddenly, the first officer took another step closer, his frustration mounting. He reached toward her again, a move meant to assert dominance, to intimidate, to control. But she had anticipated this. Her body shifted just enough to maintain distance, her hand subtly deflecting his reach. Her movements were precise, controlled, the result of countless hours of training and experience. She was calm, composed, and fully aware of every nuance in the situation. The officer hesitated, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. He had expected compliance, fear, or hesitation. What he faced instead was calm authority, readiness, and self-assurance. The balance of power had shifted in a way that neither officer had anticipated. For the first time, they seemed genuinely unsure of what would happen next. Her mind raced through options, but her movements were deliberate, not rushed. She was ready for escalation if necessary, but she preferred control over confrontation. Her training had taught her that awareness and preparation often prevented conflict from spiraling out of control. Yet she was prepared to act decisively if it did. Every instinct told her to stay calm, stay strong, and let the officers make the first critical mistake. The tension in the air was thick. Even the faint sounds of the quiet street seemed amplified. The distant hum of a passing car, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the faint murmur of neighbors from nearby homes. She took in everything, using her senses to assess the environment. There were no hidden dangers in the immediate area, no threats beyond the officers themselves, yet she remained alert. She knew that in situations like this, even the smallest misstep could change everything. The first officer's patience was clearly wearing thin. "I said step aside," he repeated, his voice louder, more commanding. She moved as instructed, keeping her movements smooth and controlled, maintaining her balance and awareness. She understood that any sign of aggression or fear could escalate the encounter. By moving deliberately, she was communicating that she was compliant but not vulnerable. The second officer, noticing his partner's frustration, took a cautious step back, trying to maintain some control without provoking further tension. His eyes constantly scanned her, as if looking for a sign of weakness or hesitation, but she gave none. Her calm presence was like a shield, creating a quiet yet undeniable authority in the space between them. And then it happened. The first officer made a sudden, aggressive move, reaching toward her in an attempt to seize control. It was fast, forceful, and uncalculated, but she was ready. Her body reacted instantly, her hands and arms moving with precision, creating space and maintaining distance. She deflected the reach without aggression, without unnecessary force, but with unmistakable control. The officer stumbled slightly, surprised by her reaction, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. For a brief moment, silence enveloped the street. The flashing red and blue lights continued to paint the scene in surreal colors, but the officers were frozen, caught between authority and shock. The second officer's hand lingered near his belt, unsure whether to intervene, unsure how to proceed. He had never encountered someone who could respond with such calm precision under pressure. Her mind remained clear, her awareness heightened. She didn't panic. She didn't shout. She simply stood her ground, ready to defend herself if necessary. Her movements were controlled, deliberate, and effective. She understood that in moments like this, confidence and composure could be more powerful than force. The officers had expected fear, submission, or confusion. Instead, they were met with readiness, calm, and capability. The first officer, now visibly frustrated, tried to regain control by asserting verbal authority. "Step back now," he demanded, his voice loud and commanding. She complied, moving smoothly to maintain distance, but her posture never wavered. Every movement communicated control, awareness, and readiness. She was compliant, but not powerless. The second officer, seeing his partner struggle, began to approach cautiously, likely hoping to regain some semblance of authority. But she was ready. Her gaze shifted slightly, tracking his movements, assessing his approach. She subtly adjusted her stance, keeping herself balanced and prepared, signaling without words that she could handle whatever came next. The tension continued to build, each second stretching longer, each movement charged with significance. She could feel the shift in energy. The officers were no longer entirely in control. They were reacting to her calm authority, her readiness, and the unexpected precision of her movements. What had started as a routine stop had turned into a delicate standoff, a test of composure, awareness, and control. Her heart remained steady. She had trained for moments like this, and her training had taught her that fear could not dictate actions. Awareness, control, and precision were far more important. She kept her hands visible, her body balanced, and her mind clear. She was fully present, fully aware, and fully capable. The first officer, realizing that his usual tactics were failing, paused for a moment, reconsidering his approach. His partner lingered nearby, hesitant and cautious. The balance of power had shifted subtly but undeniably. She had not made a single aggressive move, yet she had created a presence that demanded respect and attention. The officers were forced to recognize her capability, whether they liked it or not. In that moment, the street seemed to hold its breath. The quiet night, the flickering lights, and the distant sounds of the neighborhood all faded into the background. What remained was a tension-filled space where every movement mattered, every glance conveyed meaning, and every breath carried significance. She was in control of herself, her reactions, and her awareness. The officers, by contrast, were caught in uncertainty and disbelief. Then, with a calm but firm motion, she subtly adjusted her stance, signaling readiness without aggression. The officers saw it and paused. They had assumed she would be intimidated, that they could control the situation easily. But she had shown them otherwise. Her calm confidence, her measured movements, and her awareness had shifted the encounter entirely. It was not an act of defiance, not an attempt to provoke, but a demonstration of preparedness, control, and presence. She communicated without words that she was aware of every possibility, ready to act if necessary, but fully capable of maintaining composure. The officers, realizing they had underestimated her, hesitated. Their usual authority was challenged, and they had no clear path forward. Every second stretched longer as the standoff continued. She maintained her focus, aware of the officers, aware of the street, aware of every subtle change in posture, tone, and movement. She remained calm, patient, and alert, knowing that the situation could escalate at any moment, but confident in her ability to respond. Her calm presence was a powerful tool, reshaping the dynamics of the encounter without a single aggressive action. The first officer, frustrated and confused, took a cautious step back. His partner mirrored the motion, their tension visible, their confidence shaken. They had expected compliance, fear, and submission. Instead, they were confronted with calm readiness, precision, and control. It was a lesson in assumptions, bias, and the unexpected strength of a person underestimated. In that quiet, tense moment, she held the balance. The officers were forced to reconsider their approach, their authority, and their expectations. She had not struck a single blow, had not raised her voice, had not escalated the situation. Yet her presence alone had created an undeniable command of the space, a quiet strength that shifted the power dynamic entirely. And in that moment, the street, the lights, the silence, and the tension all seemed to converge around her. She stood composed, aware, and ready, demonstrating that courage, preparation, and calm authority could overcome fear, prejudice, and the unexpected challenges of the night. The encounter was far from over, but she had already shown that she was capable, strong, and prepared for whatever might come next. The tension on the quiet street had grown almost unbearable. Every shadow cast by the flickering red and blue lights of the police car seemed sharper. Every rustle of the wind through the trees louder, as if the night itself was watching the encounter. She remained calm, breathing evenly, but her awareness was heightened to every detail. The position of the officers, the slight shift of their feet, the way their hands hovered near belts and pockets. The situation had reached a point where any sudden move could determine what happened next. The first officer's face was tight with frustration and disbelief. He had expected fear, confusion, hesitation, anything that would make her compliant. What he got instead was calm authority, confidence, and readiness. He tried to assert himself verbally, but every word he spoke seemed to carry less weight than before. She had not moved aggressively, had not raised her voice, yet she had already changed the balance of power. "Step back again," he said, trying to regain control, his tone sharper, more commanding. She moved smoothly, taking deliberate steps that maintained balance and readiness. Every motion was purposeful, every breath measured. She was calm, but not passive. Her posture, her eyes, her presence, all communicated that she was fully aware of the situation and fully capable of defending herself if necessary. The second officer, standing slightly behind his partner, glanced around nervously. His earlier confidence was replaced with visible unease. He whispered into his radio again, but the words came out hesitant, unsure. It was clear that they were realizing they had misjudged her. They had approached the situation with assumptions, relying on bias and expectation rather than assessment, and now they faced someone who had prepared for every contingency. She stayed aware of her surroundings. Even though the street seemed empty, she considered every angle, every possible approach the officers could take, and every way she could protect herself if the situation escalated. Her training had prepared her for moments like this: high-pressure encounters, tense standoffs, moments where awareness and precision mattered more than force. She relied on that preparation now, keeping her mind clear and focused. The first officer moved closer, a hint of aggression in his step. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. She complied instantly, keeping her hands visible at chest level. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, but she was fully aware of the space between them, the positions of their bodies, and the potential outcomes of each movement. She was calm, but inside, her mind was running through every possibility, weighing the best way to ensure her safety while avoiding unnecessary escalation. Suddenly, he lunged forward in a more forceful attempt to assert dominance. It was fast and unpredictable, but she had anticipated it. Her body reacted immediately. With precise and controlled movements, she stepped aside and subtly shifted her stance, creating distance while maintaining balance. Her reaction was measured, not aggressive, but it sent a clear message. She was not to be underestimated. The officer froze, eyes wide, caught off guard by her swift and controlled reaction. His partner, witnessing this, took a cautious step back, uncertainty in his expression. The dynamic had shifted. They were no longer fully in control. They were reacting to her. And she had not made a single aggressive move yet. Her presence, her calm, and her readiness were enough to make them reconsider their next steps. For a brief moment, silence fell over the street. The lights from the patrol car continued to flash, casting red and blue patterns across the asphalt and nearby walls. Even the distant sounds of the neighborhood seemed muted, leaving only the tension between them. She remained calm, poised, and fully aware, her eyes tracking the movements of both officers without blinking. Every instinct was alert, every muscle ready to respond if needed. The first officer tried to regain control by speaking again, his tone sharp but wavering slightly. "Step aside or we'll take action," he shouted. She moved as instructed, maintaining her posture, hands visible, and her focus unwavering. She was compliant in movement, but in presence she remained in control. Every step communicated readiness, not fear. Every glance conveyed awareness, not hesitation. The second officer, now more cautious than ever, moved closer to support his partner but did so tentatively. His body language showed uncertainty. His shoulders were tense, his movements hesitant, and his eyes continuously flicked between her and his partner. The situation that had begun as routine had become a standoff where her calm authority dominated the energy of the encounter. She noticed subtle signs of panic beginning to creep in. The first officer's movements were less coordinated, his tone harsher yet inconsistent. The second officer's hand lingered near his belt, unsure if intervention was needed or if it would escalate the situation further. Their body language betrayed their realization that they had miscalculated. They had assumed compliance and control, but instead faced a person who was calm, aware, and capable. Her mind stayed clear. She did not let the tension cloud her judgment. Every instinct, every lesson learned from training, guided her to maintain composure. She knew that reacting with aggression would only escalate the situation, and yielding out of fear could be dangerous. Instead, she remained centered, showing control without confrontation. Her calm demeanor was her strength, and it was working. The officers attempted a few verbal commands, but their authority was losing impact. Her presence, measured movements, and readiness made it clear she was not to be intimidated. The first officer gestured more aggressively, trying to provoke fear, but she moved fluidly, adjusting her stance subtly to maintain balance and distance. Her movements were precise, deliberate, and controlled, signaling readiness without threat. The second officer began to speak into his radio again, his words hesitant. It was obvious to her that they were realizing just how unprepared they had been. They were reacting to her calmness and control rather than dictating the situation themselves. Every tense second emphasized the shift of authority in the encounter. They had assumed fear, hesitation, and compliance, but she had none of those. The street remained quiet, the only sounds the occasional whisper of wind and the distant hum of passing cars. Yet the space between them was charged, filled with unspoken tension. She remained aware of the details, the positions of their feet, the subtle movements of their hands, the slight changes in their expressions. Each detail mattered. Each could indicate a shift or escalation. Her focus was absolute. Then, the first officer attempted another sudden movement, reaching toward her. She had anticipated this possibility and responded instantly. With controlled precision, she deflected his approach, maintaining distance while keeping herself balanced. Her movements were calm and deliberate, a demonstration of readiness and self-awareness. She had not raised her voice, had not used aggression, but her presence alone commanded attention and respect. The second officer hesitated, uncertain whether to intervene. His partner's reaction had clearly shaken him. He had never encountered someone who could respond with such calm precision in the face of aggression. The two officers exchanged a glance, an unspoken acknowledgement of their misjudgment. They were facing someone who would not be intimidated, someone fully prepared to protect themselves if necessary. Her heart rate remained steady. She did not let the adrenaline of the moment push her into impulsive actions. Instead, she relied on awareness, experience, and preparation. Her calm demeanor was a tool, diffusing potential escalation while signaling that she could respond if needed. She understood the power of presence, of measured action, and of confidence in moments of tension. The first officer's voice rose in frustration. "Listen to me. Step back now," he shouted, trying to reassert control. She complied, taking deliberate steps that maintained her balance and readiness. Every movement communicated that she was aware, prepared, and fully in control of her actions. She had not provoked them, yet she held the upper hand through composure and readiness alone. The second officer continued to move cautiously, his eyes darting to her and then to his partner. Their earlier confidence had been replaced by uncertainty and hesitation. They had assumed that fear or aggression would give them control, but they were now reacting to someone calm, precise, and fully aware. The encounter had transformed from a routine stop into a tense standoff defined by awareness, preparation, and control. Then, for the first time, she subtly shifted her stance, signaling readiness without aggression. Her eyes remained steady, scanning for movement, assessing distance, and maintaining awareness. It was a silent demonstration that she was fully capable of defending herself if necessary. The officers noticed it immediately, their movement slowing, their hesitation growing. They realized that their assumptions had been wrong and that the person before them could not be controlled by intimidation. The street, bathed in the red and blue glow of the police lights, seemed to hold its breath. Every second stretched, every movement became significant. She stood poised, aware, and ready, a quiet presence of calm authority. The officers, by contrast, were tense, unsure, and increasingly cautious. They had misjudged her, and now they were forced to confront that reality. The tension remained thick, but she did not panic. She continued to observe, respond with calm precision, and maintain her posture of readiness. Her awareness allowed her to anticipate potential moves, maintain distance, and project control. The officers had expected compliance and fear, but she had shown them a different kind of strength, a calm, deliberate, and controlled authority that left them unsure how to proceed. In that charged moment, it was clear that she had gained the upper hand without aggression. Her calm presence, precise movements, and unwavering focus had shifted the power dynamic entirely. The officers were forced to recognize her capability, reconsider their approach, and confront the reality that they had underestimated her. She remained composed, aware, and ready, proving that strength comes not from force alone but from confidence, preparation, and control. The street had grown quieter, though the tension lingered like a thick fog. The flashing lights from the police car continued to paint the scene in harsh red and blue, highlighting every movement, every shadow, every detail. She stood where she had been moments before, calm, poised, and fully aware. The officers were still tense, their earlier confidence replaced with caution and disbelief. What had started as a routine stop had escalated into something neither side had anticipated, and now the air felt charged with anticipation. She knew that this was a crucial moment. It wasn't about proving strength through aggression, but about maintaining control while navigating a situation that could easily spiral. She had shown the officers that she could respond decisively if needed, but she had not escalated unnecessarily. That calm authority now gave her the advantage. She breathed evenly, observing the subtle signs, the tightening of the officers' grips on their belts, the way their eyes flicked toward each other, the hesitant shifts of their feet. The first officer finally seemed to realize that the approach he had relied on for authority was failing. His voice was firmer, attempting to re-establish control, but it lacked the confidence it had carried at the beginning. "Step back now," he said, the command almost mechanical, stripped of the ease with which he had started. She complied, moving deliberately, her body balanced, her hands still visible. Every motion remained calm, showing awareness and readiness without aggression. The second officer was visibly nervous. His eyes darted to the first officer, then back to her, uncertainty written across his face. He whispered something into the radio, his tone hesitant. Even though the words were low, they carried the weight of a man realizing that things had not gone according to plan. Their initial assumptions that she would comply without resistance had been shattered. Now they had to think carefully about every step. She remained steady, aware that the tension could erupt at any moment. Her training had taught her that preparation and awareness were more powerful than aggression. She maintained her stance, her gaze steady, projecting calm authority. The officers were reacting to her, not the other way around. She had not moved recklessly or raised her voice. Her control came from the quiet strength in her composure and readiness. After several moments, the first officer hesitated. He glanced at his partner, a flicker of uncertainty in his expression. He seemed to realize that their assumptions had led them into an unbalanced situation. He spoke again, attempting to regain authority, but the tone was less commanding than before. She could tell he was reassessing, trying to figure out how to proceed without further escalating the encounter. Her mind remained clear. She did not panic, did not react impulsively. Every breath, every glance, every step was deliberate. She considered every possibility, every potential move by the officers, and how she could respond without unnecessary risk. Awareness, patience, and composure were her tools. She did not need to fight. She needed to remain in control, and she was doing exactly that. The second officer's voice wavered as he called back into his radio again. She noticed the hesitation, the subtle uncertainty, the small movements that revealed their awareness of her capability. The officers were no longer acting purely on procedure. They were reacting to her, to the presence of someone who had anticipated their moves and responded with controlled precision. A few neighbors had begun to notice the prolonged interaction. From their windows, they could see the tension, the deliberate movements, and the calm authority she exhibited. Some whispered to each other, unsure of what to do. Others were quietly impressed, sensing that they were witnessing a display of composure and skill. But she remained focused, aware of the eyes around her but not distracted by them. Her priority was the immediate situation, not the opinions of onlookers. The first officer attempted another step forward, a test of authority, but she remained poised. She shifted slightly, maintaining distance while keeping her balance and hands visible. Her movements were deliberate and controlled, signaling readiness without aggression. The officers paused, uncertain how to proceed, realizing that their usual tactics would not work here. For several moments, there was silence broken only by the soft hum of the patrol car and the distant sounds of the neighborhood. The officers' tension was palpable. They were caught in a situation they could not fully control, facing someone who had proven capable, calm, and aware. Every instinct they had relied on for authority was being questioned, every assumption challenged. She stayed in control through her calm presence. Her awareness extended to every subtle change in the officer's posture, tone, and gaze. She knew that remaining composed was more effective than any sudden action. By staying calm, she allowed the officers to make decisions while demonstrating that she would not be intimidated or caught off guard. Her strength was quiet but undeniable. Then the first officer spoke again, this time with a more restrained tone. "Let's calm down," he said. It was a stark contrast to his earlier commands. She sensed the shift, the recognition that their approach had been flawed. The balance of authority had shifted subtly but unmistakably. She remained still, steady, and aware, not celebrating but maintaining focus. The second officer took a cautious step forward, his movements tentative. His grip on his belt was less rigid, his stance less aggressive. He was beginning to assess the situation more carefully, realizing that their assumptions had put them in a precarious position. She watched, ready for any sudden movement, but confident that her calm authority would continue to guide the interaction. The first officer's frustration was clear, but it was now mixed with a growing respect. He had underestimated her from the start, and now he was faced with the undeniable reality of her capability. His movements were slower, more deliberate, and he seemed to be reconsidering every step. The second officer mirrored this hesitation, their combined uncertainty highlighting how significantly the situation had shifted. Time passed slowly. Every second felt heavy, every movement significant. She maintained her stance, projecting calm readiness. Her hands remained visible, her body balanced, her gaze steady. The officers were reacting to her presence, and it was clear they were no longer confident in their authority. She had proven through composure and preparedness that she could command the situation without aggression. The officers exchanged another glance, this time longer, as if silently agreeing to take a different approach. Their earlier strategies, intimidation, assumptions, and reliance on authority, had failed. They were now attempting to navigate a situation where their usual tactics were ineffective. She remained poised, ready for any development but not seeking confrontation. Then the first officer spoke with measured calm. "We'll let you go," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. It was an acknowledgement of her control and preparedness. They had realized that further action could escalate the situation unnecessarily, and they chose to step back. She did not react with triumph, did not celebrate. Instead, she maintained her calm, steady posture, aware that composure was her greatest tool. The officers took a few steps back, their movements deliberate, signaling the de-escalation of the encounter. She remained aware, observing them until they had regained their composure. It was a quiet moment of understanding, their recognition of her capability and her demonstration of calm authority and control. The encounter, tense and unpredictable, had reached its resolution. She finally relaxed slightly, taking a deep breath and allowing herself to acknowledge the release of tension. The flashing lights from the patrol car continued to illuminate the street, but the energy had shifted. The officers, once rigid with assumption and authority, were now cautious, respectful, and aware. She had navigated the encounter without aggression, without fear, and without losing composure. As she stepped back into her car, she noticed the subtle glances of neighbors who had watched the encounter unfold. Some nodded in quiet acknowledgement, some whispered in surprise. She remained focused on starting her car, maintaining the same calm demeanor that had carried her through the tense moments. Every movement was deliberate, confident, and controlled. The officers returned to their car and drove away slowly, still cautious, their confidence shaken, but their actions respectful. She watched until they disappeared from sight, ensuring the immediate danger had passed. Once the street was clear, she exhaled fully, a release of the tight awareness that had held her body and mind so taut. She had managed a situation that could have turned dangerous, and she had done so with calm, controlled authority. Driving the last few blocks home, she reflected on the encounter. It had been more than a routine stop. It had been a test of awareness, composure, and preparedness. She had faced assumptions, bias, and aggression, yet she had maintained control without escalating the situation. Every decision she made, every movement, and every breath had contributed to the outcome. She had turned tension into authority, fear into calm, and potential conflict into resolution. Arriving home, she parked her car and sat for a moment, taking in the quiet of the evening. The lights of the city twinkled in the distance, but she felt a deep sense of calm and accomplishment. She had faced a moment that could have been frightening and dangerous, yet she had navigated it with clarity, awareness, and control. Her ability to remain composed had not only protected her, but had also shifted the perspective of those who had approached with assumptions and bias. That night, she carried with her a sense of quiet strength. She knew that the world could present unexpected challenges at any moment, but she also knew that calm awareness, preparation, and confidence were powerful tools. She had proven that strength was not always loud or aggressive, but often quiet, deliberate, and controlled. Her actions had spoken louder than any words, leaving a lasting impact on herself and those who had witnessed the encounter. By the time she stepped inside her home, the adrenaline had faded, leaving only clarity and calm. She had faced a difficult, tense, and unpredictable situation with composure, turning potential danger into an opportunity to demonstrate quiet strength. The officer's realization of her capability was a reminder of the importance of preparation, awareness, and control in moments of uncertainty. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, letting the quiet of her home wash over her. The encounter had ended, but its lessons lingered. Calmness, preparation, and presence had carried her through the night. She had faced aggression without fear, assumptions without anger, and potential danger without panic. It was a testament to her awareness, her training, and her ability to remain in control, no matter the circumstances. In the end, the evening had transformed from a routine drive into a demonstration of human resilience, awareness, and composure. She had faced bias, aggression, and misjudgment with nothing but her calm authority and presence. The officers had left with a lesson they would not forget, and she had reinforced the power of being fully prepared, aware, and composed, no matter what challenges life might bring.